Hi, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Curio, where we get curious about different financial topics and how they impact our lives. I'm Stefan Revelo, an associate advisor here at Curio Wealth, and I'm joined with my colleague, Liz Gillette. And today we'll talk through the financial implications of losing a parent. So we have this great, amazing jobs as financial advisors, and we get to walk all phases of life with our clients. That's getting married, that's having children. These are all the exciting parts of the job. On the flip side, we also have to deal with the downside. So when someone loses a family member, more specifically a parent, oftentimes we are the first person they contact in terms of how to deal with the financial implications of any inheritances. And it could be a tough time during this time of grieving. And you have all these different things being thrown at you. You come to find out that your parent has multiple things of real estate, investment accounts, cash, life insurance policies, various debt, credit card debt, car debt, a mortgage. There's all these things that are left behind that now the next generation or the next phase or other family members will now have to take on this burden. And there's so much to go through here. Where do we even start when we think about losing a parent?
Yeah, great question. Well, I have to say, our listeners and clients might have noticed we like to press pause and address the real impact of financial decisions. So, how does this event or this decision impact us in our everyday life? What kind of emotional response does it bring about? As many of you know, and some of you may not know, I lost my mom in July of 2021. And so this is a path that I have traveled. It was one of the most challenging situations that I've been through thus far in my life. And the one good thing to come out of it is I've learned quite a few things as a financial advisor and as someone who has gone down this step that unfortunately many of us are going to face again in the future. So Stefan and I gathered our thoughts here and we just wanted to start off with what are some of those first steps that you would want to take when this event happens. So step one that we came up with is you have to gather those important documents. There may be a will or a trust in place, life insurance policies, bank statements, investment accounts, everything that Stefan kind of just mentioned. Then there's the death certificate. You want to obtain a copy of the death certificate and not just one copy, because wouldn't you know that many of these financial institutions and government entities all want original copies. So you actually have to get multiple versions of that original death certificate. Then you take stock, LOL, of what you've inherited. So for better or worse, think about your financial accounts, your personal property that you may be inheriting in this situation, real estate, possible business interests. Then you have to notify all of those important parties that we just talked about, Social Security Administration, insurance companies, banks. You want to begin the process of asset transfer. And this is a good time to stop any automatic payments that you have going directly from bank accounts or from credit cards to these bill providers. Then you want to think about your state administration. Now, Stefan's going to walk us through this, but someone is responsible for managing and distributing the assets. There's either an executor named in the will, or an individual needs to apply to become the administrator of the estate. Now, we're going to hit you with this one, but you got to build your team. Okay. So this is the time that you want to seek guidance from financial advisors, estate planning attorney, and tax professional. There can be estate inheritance and income taxes to consider. Your CFP and your estate planning attorney, we can provide you guidance on these inherited assets. Think about those tax considerations and come up with estate planning strategies that align with your financial goals. The last one, I'm going to need you to slow down. You might have heard the rule that when it's the first year of any big change in your life, particularly the death of a loved one or divorce or a major traumatic life event, that you don't want to make any major decisions. So I can tell you this is a very emotionally challenging and emotionally charged time. So we're trying to give you the list of the must-have items because what we ultimately want you to do is take a moment, process your emotions, and just think about decisions that are in line with your emotional well-being as well as your financial needs.
Man, thank you, Liz, so much for all that insight. One, just thank you for sharing your personal story. Obviously, going through that is one of the most difficult things you can possibly do. And thank you so much for laying out kind of what are just initial first steps you can do. We are mindful that there's so much being thrown at you, and it is this time of grieving. It is this time of being with other family members, trying to remember any loved ones. So we understand at this time there's just a lot being thrown at you. But I kind of want to break something down that you mentioned. So you list out a bunch of first steps, but all this will kind of be dictated within a will. So if someone dies with a will or not, that will change the approach of how assets are inherited or how assets are distributed. So let's first talk about if there is a will in place. This is what we highly recommend to all of our clients. This greatly helps simplify the estate planning process. So the first thing you'd want to do is locate and find the will. You would want to kind of go through it. Oftentimes, the decedent, the person who has passed away, will assign an executor. This will be the person who will be helping facilitate the estate. So they won't have say in everything. Certain tasks that they're responsible for are overseeing any legal claims, settling any debts that are outstanding, if that's with the IRS, if that's any mortgages, paying taxes, and just managing other assets and making sure that each beneficiary is getting their share of the distributions. So kind of the first thing you'll be wanting to do is taking stock of everything. So you'll take all your inventory. You'll say, okay, we have this cash over here. We have these 3 or 4 different types of investment accounts. Oh, we have this real estate. So you're first going to just manage everything that you do have. You'll satisfy any debts that get passed on to the estate, and then making sure each beneficiary gets their fair share of what they're entitled to. Now, when we say the word probate, all that really means is that it's going in front of a judge, and the judge will help kind of facilitate all this. So it's a public process. So that's really what that term probate means. There are ways to avoid probate to make it it keeps privacy so that the general public doesn't know where the assets are going. And it's just a more stringent way to make sure each beneficiary is getting their fair share. So ways you could do this is having things like a joint ownership account. So if you think about a traditional, let's say you're married and you have a standard joint checking account, if one of you were to pass away, that account would not go through probate where the executor or the estate has any say in it. The remaining funds would just go to whoever the co-owner is. So that's one way to kind of avoid probate. Other ways are having designated beneficiaries. So you could think about your employer plan. You could think about your 401k through work. If you have your spouse listed as the primary beneficiary and your kids listed as contingent, then there's nothing to debate there. That does not need to be in a will. That does not need to be stated to the state. They will honor that commitment and send the funds to whoever you list as a beneficiary. And that's the same thing with your life insurance. So if you have any life insurance and you clearly state, I want 50% to go to my mom and 50% to go to my wife, they will honor that exactly how you stated it. And then the second thing would be dying without a will. So this is where things can get a little tricky. We understand having these conversations while you're alive can be really tough, thinking about someone passing. They're hard conversations to stomach. It's even harder to have these conversations when you're gone or when the parent's actually gone and they can't even have a say anymore. That's when things get a little dicey. So if someone dies without a will, the formal term for that is intestate. And so the person who's passed away is labeled as the decedent. And in this situation, the state will decide where the money goes and where all the assets goes. So traditionally, they'll first select an administrator. So in the will, you have the decedent, the person who passed away, selecting an executor who's serving that role. Without a will, the state will now dictate who's the administrator. So they will select who is responsible for paying off all the debts, reaching out to any beneficiaries that are entitled to anything in the estate. They're in charge of taking inventory, paying taxes. So they'll be serving that role of making sure everything gets to where they need to go. But as you can see, the problem here is the person who passed away is not the one deciding this. This would be decided by the state. And for example, in the state of Maryland, that's where we're based out of. That's where a lot of our clients live. If there's when someone passes away and there's a surviving spouse and minor children, and if there's no will in place, how that will happen is half of the estate will go to the surviving spouse, the other half will go to the minor children. So that's pretty clear. You don't need a will to have this stated. This is kind of the default in the state of Maryland. Things to avoid is neglecting. You do not want to neglect paying taxes. The IRS will come after you if you're dead or alive, unfortunately, and they're going to make sure they get their money. So even if that person had any IRS debt or if you have any taxes associated with the estate, you will want to make sure that those are being paid. This may delay the process of other people getting the money that they're entitled to, and it may just further the whole liquidation of the estate. Again, we are not professionals in this space, so we always recommend going to an estate attorney. They'll be the ones to walk you through the legal requirements and actually draft up these formal documents.
Perfectly laid out, Stefan. I love it. Maybe we should switch you over to be an estate planning attorney at this point. I feel like you have it all nailed. One thing I want to also kind of hone in on, you alluded to it earlier, but whether or not a decedent has a will in place, there are certain assets that are going to transfer according to the beneficiary designation. So in other words, these assets, they avoid probate even if you don't have a will. So which ones are those? You mentioned the life insurance policy proceeds. So anything that allows you to have a beneficiary designation or a payable upon death, you might see bank accounts have a POD, and it'll say payable upon death to Liz Gillette. And that means that the moment that primary account owner passes, that account automatically moves without the court deciding where it goes according to that designation. If it's an investment account, you're going to hear the phrase transferable upon death, TOD. Real estate has a transfer on death deed. Cars and vehicles have a transfer on death registration. Of course, that money in your 401k or IRA or other retirement account, if it has a beneficiary listed, it goes automatically to that person. And then, of course, if you have an account that's truly titled as joint tenancy or tenancy by the entirety, that means the moment that you pass, it goes to the surviving person or persons. And lastly, if you create a living trust, we're going to get into this a little bit at the end, but the idea, why would we benefit from a trust and not just a will? Well, a trust can scoop up those other items that would not necessarily be picked up by beneficiary designation and ensure they go where they need to go, according to the person who's just passed. So let's fast forward, a little bit here. You found out, that your parent died with a debt. Stefan, who's responsible for that outstanding debt?
Well, if there's going to be any good news in the topic of this tough conversation, it would be in this category of debt. So that's always a question we get when we think about estate planning, we think about family members passing. What happens to the debt? So, there's all different kinds of debt. We have mortgages, we have student loans, we have credit cards, car notes. And so the good news here is some of these debts, all these debts are not passed on to the heirs or to the estate. So for example, if someone passes away and they have $80,000 of credit card debt, that credit card debt luckily dies when they do. So this is not passed on to the children or passed on to the estate to be responsible for. That will kind of die with them. Same thing with student loans. So if they were to have student loans, any credit card debt, this would go with the decedent. Things like a mortgage, things like car notes, those you would still be responsible for paying any taxes, anything go to the IRS. So debts of those sorts will still be owed, but luckily those personal debts, those credit cards, those student loans, those are not passed down to the heirs.
And now, what you've all been waiting for. What if you end up on the good side of things? What if you're actually set to inherit some assets? Well, I just want to make one thing very clear. We both want to make this clear. Inheriting money or property from a parent has various tax implications based off of federal and state laws. So, just to give you an idea, federal taxes can include estate tax, income tax, capital gains tax. Then state taxes can have estate tax and inheritance tax. We are not going to dive into that topic today. That would probably be at least 5 to 10 episodes worth. But here are some main key takeaways that you want to think about when you are set or have inherited some assets from a parent. The first one, most common one we hear from our clients, is you inherited retirement accounts. So what you do is you notify the financial institution. They see that you're listed as a named beneficiary, and the account is then transferred into a new account, either an inherited IRA, if it's pre-tax money, or an inherited Roth IRA, if it's post-tax money. Now, you actually are required to withdraw that entire account down to $0 within 10 years of inheriting that money. The previous law allowed us to be able to make small disbursements based off of our own life expectancy. So if I inherited that money from my mom, then they would look at me and say, all right, Liz is in her 30s. She's got hopefully quite a few decades left. She has to take small distributions every single year. That has changed. Now, this might sound like a good thing, some people like this idea. Hey, I have no choice. I have to take the money within 10 years. But you got to keep in mind, if it's a pre-tax account, like a traditional IRA or 401k, you're going to get income tax on every single distribution. You're going to owe this income tax, very similar to if you were to take money out of your own 401k, not as a loan, but as a distribution, right? That entire time that money's been growing tax-free. So sure enough, you will owe income tax on the distribution. Now, the good news is there is no early withdrawal penalty. So I was in my early 30s when my mom passed. My sister was in her 20s. If we had to take money out of an IRA, it wouldn't really be too fair that we weren't age 59 and a half and we were getting a slap on the wrist. So there is no early withdrawal penalty. Roth IRA works in a pretty similar realm. There's no early withdrawal penalty, and very similar to taking out your own Roth IRA. As long as the money's in there for 5 years and you check all the boxes, you can take it out without any taxes owed because, of course, that money was invested after taxes were paid. So it's handled just as if you were to pull from your own Roth IRA. Now, taxable accounts, you guys don't like when we call it that, but that's the reality. So brokerage accounts, individual joint accounts, non-retirement accounts, whatever name you prefer. Once you notify the institution, you complete the required forms, the accounts again are transferred into your name. So the assets in this account typically receive a step up in basis. What that means is their value is adjusted to the value of the asset at the time of the person's death. I'm going to give you an example. Let's say that your parents bought stock at $10 a share. Your dad passes and he bought this stock in XYZ company at $10 a share. Today, it's worth $100 a share. If he waits and passes that stock on to you upon his death, then that stock has a new cost basis on his date of death of $100 a share. So in other words, if he gave it to you the day before he died and you went to sell it, that $90 gain between the $10 you paid and the $100 it's worth now, you would owe taxes on that whole entire gain. But if he played his cards right and waited till he passed and handed it over to you, now it looks as if there is zero gain on the investment. It looks as if you bought it at $100 a share. This is incredibly valuable. You might have heard step-up basis, frankly, come up in the political world. It's been tossed out quite a few times in the last couple of years. But that's the current law, is that you would get a step-up in basis at the time of their death. So what that really does is it reduces that capital gains tax if you sell the assets. So, fun tip. You may want to think of it this way. A taxable account inheritance could be a good source of cash. If you have, say, a short-term goal, you want a down payment on a house, you want to pay a high interest debt, right? Because you're not going to owe that large tax gain that you would, as I mentioned, if your dad had passed the day before. Now, of course, if you'd rather stay invested, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we like when our clients say invested, well, you have to make sure you have the right mix of investments. And of course, interest, dividends, anything earned after the date of death, that's going to be taxable to you at the usual short-term and long-term capital gains. All right, that's on the investment side. So what about real estate? Let's say you inherit your parents' home or other real estate. Ding, 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 that step up in basis, it's there again. Now you can imagine there have been areas of our country where prices have skyrocketed. And frankly, if someone owns a home for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you're pretty guaranteed to say, hey, you bought it at $200,000 and now it's $1 million value home. The exact same step up in basis happens where if dad passed that along to us and the day that he dies, it says, actually, you paid $1 million for this home and you wouldn't have to worry about paying that additional capital gains tax on the gain. Okay. And lastly, life insurance. Once you send that death certificate to the insurance company, they give you some claim forms to fill it out. You do want to be mindful if there was an accrued cash value or outstanding loans, how that impacts the death benefit. We always walk our clients through that. But those proceeds are tax-free income to you. So those are some of the big top, let's say, 4 categories: retirement accounts, taxable accounts, real estate, and life insurance. Stefan, I would say those are the big 4 that we see clients have when they begin to inherit assets. So you want to do us a favor, you want to wrap things up and tell us what our listeners can do to plan today, for the future?
Yeah. So let's flip it on its head a little bit. So we just talked a lot about what you're doing as the person who lost a parent, and now you're having to kind of step in, take inventory of the estate, disperse it out. Let's say you are a parent and you have young children. What are things that you can do to prepare and to avoid some of these pitfalls for your own children? One thing would just be, as we said multiple times, just the importance of establishing these estate planning documents. So if you have young children, the clientele that we work with is a lot of new families. And this is often a missed step or a missed thing whenever we get a new client is, do you guys have a will in place? Who would take care of your children if something were to occur? So you just want to make sure that you create a will, create a whole estate plan. Think about your online accounts. Does your spouse know your logins to your accounts? You can quickly see how this can become a problem if someone passes away and the spouse can't even access what the dollar amounts are, who are the beneficiaries. So making sure that this information is available and easy for your spouse to find, or just any family member in the event that you pass away. Making sure you designate your beneficiaries. So let's say you have a 401k and at the time you were single and now you have a wife or a spouse in general. You will want to make sure that you periodically review your accounts to make sure, I now have a spouse. I want them to be the designated beneficiary. If you just had children, you want to make sure you get them added right when they're born. So this is a thing that constantly needs to be reviewed. Other things that are on non-financial are healthcare directives. So you can think, if you are sick or mentally not capable of making decisions, you can give your spouse or another family member the right to make decisions on your behalf when you aren't able to. So these are also things that you would include within your estate planning docs. So that's kind of the non-financial side. And then you can also do the tactics like we said about avoiding probate by having joint accounts and by just making sure you designate your beneficiary so that the state is not the one deciding. And I would say this is the most important thing, and this is the toughest one, is you got to talk about the death. You got to talk about a world where you're not around and how that will look. You should communicate with the people who will be inheriting money and say, hey, you're listed as a 50% beneficiary from our 401k. Just want to let you know, you don't even maybe share direct numbers, but you want to let them know that they are in your estate planning documents. Like I said, this is really tough to have, of course, especially no one likes to have these conversations. But like we've seen just with our clients, these conversations are a lot harder when you're not around. So when everyone is aware of what's going on, how it's going to be approached, it just makes everything feel great. And if you're still not sold, for example, let's go back to that example with the state of Maryland. So let's say you pass away, your spouse gets half the estate, and your minor children get the other half. Doesn't sound like a bad problem. It sounds pretty solid if you ask me, but there are several problems that can arise from that. So let's say you have no will and that's the exact scenario that occurs. One thing that comes to mind is guardianship issues. So when money is passed to a minor, they can't manage the money themselves. So the state will select who will manage the money on their behalf. And they may not manage the money in the way that you intended as the decedent. They may not do it what's best for the children. They may do what's in their own best interest. So when you don't have a will and these things are not specifically spelled out, it can cause a lot of issues. And you could also dictate, you don't want to hand, let's say you have $1 million inheritance. You typically don't want to give that $8 million to an 18 or 19-year-old kid. You can just imagine what would happen there. So having certain restrictions on when they can access it, how they can access it, is key. Another thing would just be, another issue would be delaying access to the funds. So this whole process of distributing assets can be very time consuming. It could take months. It could take up to a year. So making sure you have everything spelled out, making sure everyone is in the know will help kind of speed up this process. Another pitfall when not having will is just mismanagement overall. So wills provide instruction. That is really the main purpose of those. When there's no instruction and it's left to interpretation or it's left to the state, that's where things just can go awry real quick. You want full control of these assets. You want to make sure that you want your legacy to be left how you intended to. So having these wills in place is super crucial for that. And then the number one most important thing, or the number one pitfall here, is family disputes. During these emotional times, people can act in ways where they typically don't act. You can have upset family members going at each other for certain assets, especially when they're significant, saying, oh, but I'm entitled to 50%, more than 50%. And that's when you can think that your family will always be peaceful about when you pass away. Oh, no, of course, my family would never do that until they're in that situation. And no one really knows how to react once they're in that situation. So it's just important to make sure that everyone's in the know and there's always clear communication of how the estate planning process will go. So Liz, I kind of have a bonus question for you. So we talked about will, we keep saying wills and not having a will. So if I have a will, is that enough? Will that satisfy all my needs when it comes to estate planning?
Well, it's tempting, right? Especially when you see all these online will providers and the idea of, quote, estate planning might sound more complicated than necessary. But this is how I think of it. The will is used after you die. What happens with your assets after you die? How does it get to your beneficiaries? But where we often see clients benefit is from also having a trust. That is talking about, what happens to the assets? How do they get distributed? Where do I name my guardians? That's where I can name, an executor of everything. Stefan, pause. Sorry, Bailey just came in the room. I'm going to redo that.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, whoever's editing this. So a will is really beneficial because it lays out how your assets are distributed, after you die, to make sure that your wishes go as you would like them to be able to name guardians for your minor children, all of that. But what a trust can do is it can actually give permission, and other estate planning documents like a power of attorney, it can give permission to distribute and to manage your assets while you are alive. And this can be really helpful. It can minimize estate taxes. It helps you avoid probate. So in an example where you enter a nursing home and you need a plan to be able to spend down your assets, you want to be able to get, on Medicaid, or if you become disabled, you have a stroke, it turns out you can have a beneficiary on your will, on your bank account, they do not have access to be able to pay your bills. They can't walk into the bank and say, look at this, I'm on the will. Look at this, I'm the beneficiary in the bank. That does not matter. That only references what happens after you're already gone. So think of it this way: wills distribute your stuff after your death, but it's the full estate planning package where you have your power of attorney and your healthcare directives, and in certain circumstances, your trust, that allows you to feel really good about the future that you've set up, for those most important to you. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for joining us. I know this might not be the first episode that you've clicked on, but we really did our best to be able to give you some of the most important topics that we discussed today in terms of what it looks like, what first steps you have to take when you're put in this not so lucky situation, how you can maximize it, what happens if your parents are leaving you assets, what happens if your parents were more of in a debt situation. And I just, believe it or not, guys, I found this to be quite therapeutic. So, Stefan, thank you for joining me. Thank you for sharing. And I'm hopeful that this can get some information out to the people that may need it most.
Definitely. Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what you said. Just hopefully, if you're listening to this, you don't need this information at this time. But if you do, and that's unfortunately, this is things that we all will have to go through. Hopefully, we were able to provide some insight or just maybe some first steps to kind of assist you during this grieving and tough time. And like we said, make sure to build your team. Connect with a estate planning attorney, connect with a financial advisor, connect with tax people, get some people in your corner to help facilitate all these things, because you're going to want and need all the help you can get. So thank you guys for listening to the podcast. Please, you can find us at curiowealth.com. You can find us across various social media platforms such as LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. So thank you for listening, and hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.